All right, hang on. We've got Dr. Jessie Lay here with us. She is currently used to be at KSU. Now she's at UK, but she's going to be talking about the avian flu and some of the things that we're experiencing with that. And she's a good resource on that, but also any other questions it's kind of pressing in the industry too. So, if nothing else, we'll turn it over to Dr. Lay.
All right, thank you guys. Recognize a lot of faces. It's great to be back. Usually I'm up here talking about sheep and goats, but we're going to change it up today. At UK, I'm still on small ruminants, but I also do something called One Health, right? So One Health is the connection of where human health and animal health and the environment all come together, right? So today I'm here. I've been working with the state health department on some zoonotic diseases, right? Diseases that can go to people. So I'm going to give you a real quick update on avian flu. All right, and so I'm not a microbiologist, and I hate getting technical, right? I'm going to bring up a couple points here, but like I said, I'm not going to get into all the technical stuff. Whenever we start talking about RNA viruses, there's a couple of points I need to make. So when you think about DNA, the double helix, basically DNA is structured like a ladder, right? Just a ladder that's coiled. When we start talking about RNA viruses, right, like the flu virus, it's just got one side. Right? So when you think about a ladder, think about it having the two long pieces. What if you don't have one of them? It's not going to be stable, is it? Right? A ladder's not going to be stable with just one side. Right? The other thing, when we start talking about flu viruses, there's only 8 genes. When we talk about humans, there's millions of genes. Right? If one gene mutates, it's a drop in the bucket, doesn't really matter. Right? The flu virus isn't like that. It's only got 8 genes on it, so if one of them changes, it's a completely different beast, right? Because that one gene is like 20% of its makeup. All right, so everybody's talking about this high-path avian flu, right? And bird flu, H5N1, it's got a whole lot of names. What's the big deal, right? I'm a very much so what kind of girl. Right? So, when one gene mutates, it can make a huge difference. And what's happened on this flu virus, right, is the pathogenesis, right, how aggressive, how fatal something is, changed, right? COVID-19 was in the same category as a common cold, but it wasn't a common cold, right? So in this virus, there's been a massive shift in the way that it acts. You're seeing in these flocks, these chicken flocks, it'll kill 90% of the birds. It's that aggressive. But the biggest problem is it's broke something called the species barrier. Y'all, I'm a vet. I'm gonna tell you the truth, people gross me out. There's no way I could be a human nurse. Like I said, I don't do people. And one of the things that I've always loved is most of the diseases that animals get, I can't catch. I can't get parvo, right? I can't get chicken fever, right? So for the most part, for a long time, I didn't have to worry about catching stuff for my patients, right? A dog poops on the floor, you walk by with a paper towel. People ain't going near you, right? What's happened with this is the species barrier was broken, right? Which, like I said, most of the time, chickens get chicken viruses. People get people. But this one can go to multiple different types of species, right? So that's the big deal here, right? So what animals can get it? So far that we know of, right? Humans can get this one. Right? This is one of those that I actually can catch from my patients. Birds, cows, cats, and a few other mammals. right? So where's it coming from, right? The general public, they want to look at us farmers and talk about how, all the diseases in animals. This ain't our fault, right? The reservoir for this is in wild birds, right? Mostly waterfowl, right? So that's your geese, your ducks, but any of the migrating birds, right? We can't kill buzzards because there's an act that says we can't shoot them, right? So all these wild birds, like I said, just fly at will. Right? Right. So, wildlife, right? Why am I talking about this now? You're like, well, I haven't heard anything in a while about avian flu, right? Well, you heard it in the spring, and then summertime not as much, but what's happening now? The birds are moving again, right? So we try to contain all these outbreaks, but we can't stop a goose from going from Alabama to Michigan. I mean, that's just the fact of it. And if that bird is sick, anything it flies over, right, it's putting at risk, right, because of the seasonal patterns of migration. You can see that chart up on the top of how far those birds can go, right? If you're worried about livestock, or birds, if you find a dead goose on your farm, right, the Department of Fish and Wildlife will take it and test it for free, right? You can get on their website. They have on their website what counties that it's been in, right? All right, so let's talk about poultry. I grew up with chickens running around the barnyard, and loved it. And you hear a lot of people talking, and I do absolutely understand their concerns about, cage-free birds. Because right now, most of our commercial poultry operations have everything in a barn. The birds never go outside, right? That's to protect the birds, right? When these large poultry operations are raising them indoors, what they're doing is protecting them from all the wild birds that we can't control, right? So in poultry, right, our backyard flocks are going to be more at risk, right? Because they're out there, and if a goose flies over them, they're out there and exposed, right? Now the problem is on these big operations, when you do have an outbreak and it's 90% fatal, it completely wipes out 1 million chickens, right? So those are the problems that we're looking at in poultry, right? Biosecurity. Like I said, when you have them inside a barn, you can control what comes in and out of the barn, right? We used to be able to do field trips to some of these big poultry operations. They'd let the little 4-H kids come in and see stuff. They'd close their doors, nobody in and out, right? Because if they lose 90% of their birds, that's going to be a big hit, right? Like I said, for small farms, like I said, our birds being outdoors and cage-free, I do. That's their natural setting. I love seeing it. But the fact is, it does make them more at risk. All right. So treatment, there's no treatment with these birds. It's a respiratory tract infection, and then they die. So when it goes through a flock, it'll kill about 90% of them. Right? Trying to avoid their exposure to wild birds. Right? Biosecurity, limiting what's coming in and out. Right? They've talked about vaccinating these chickens. Most vaccines for chickens, they actually vaccinate the egg, right? Right now, the only vaccine we have for chickens is injectable. And these big chicken houses, like I said, have 1 million birds at a time. Who's going to go in there and catch 1 million birds and know what you did and what you didn't do, right? So right now, we're not vaccinating because the logistics of it. But I talk about breaking that species barrier. So something weird. Cats, it's not a respiratory thing. With cats, it's neurologic. It affects the brain, right? If a cat becomes infected, they stagger for like 24 hours and then they die, right? So they actually had like 2 or 3 tigers or lions die at one of the zoos, which aren't cheap animals, right? Just because they got exposed, they got neurologic and just died. On our farms, everybody's got barn cats, or most people do, right? So the cats are ending up being the canary in the coal mine, right? A lot of times the cat starts staggering and dies. Then you have symptoms in your animals. They can alert us ahead of time. The biggest problem we've got, though, is actually in dairy cattle, right? Like I said, this virus is weird. It's jumping all over the place, doing different stuff. Now, cows, when they get the avian flu, they get a mild respiratory thing for like 2 days and then get over it. But they get mastitis in their udder for like 2 months. And they shed this virus in their milk, like in huge numbers, right? So you got chickens, it's pneumonia, you got cats, it's in the brain, and now we got cows and it's in the udder. Like I said, this virus is doing some really weird stuff. All right, so dairy cattle, what we had to do, California had a mess, right? Those cows weren't very happy, right? They test at the silos, right? That's when the milk is picked up and taken to the processing plant. They're testing every load of milk that comes in for it, right? We're doing farm level testing as well, right? Quarantining the positive herds. Like I said, these cows will get over it, but it takes a couple of months for it to run through, and a lot of stuff in the meantime, right? So prevention, keeping the birds away from your cows, but what are you gonna do, bring them in the house, right? So that's easier said than done. Strict biosecurity when you can. You know, I've never got a cow to wear a mask or stay 6 feet away from each other. I haven't figured out how to get them to do that yet. But the thing is, they're not going to Walmart either, right? We can control what's coming on and off the farm, except unfortunately the wild birds. Beef cattle, same thing as dairy cows. We just don't see the mastitis because we're not milking them every day. When it runs through a beef herd, right, the cows will be off feed for a day. What you usually see is their calf balling when they're not making a lot of milk. All right, and humans. Like I said, I did get a grant from the Human Health Department, so this is really what they want me to talk about. So in people, it acts like the flu, except in addition to having all the respiratory gunk, you get pink eye in both eyes, right? Eyes will be red, matted shut, right? And that looks uncomfortable to me, right? So, and it can spread. Who's going to be at the most risk? Right, you know, our dairy farmers, that milk splashes everywhere when you're in a parlor, right? Our poultry workers, and then people drinking raw milk, which I'll get to in just a second, right? Okay, we can go ahead and do this now. So I talked about in dairy cows that it gets in the udder and it's shed through the milk like in extremely high numbers. The good news is, even if they don't catch it when they test the milk, pasteurization kills it, right? So when you pasteurize milk, it heats it up enough to kill a lot of the germs, and then you drink it. We learned pasteurization was invented 100 years ago. But now there are people who are trying to go back all natural, right? And they want everything natural, and that's great, except, right, when we pasteurize milk, we do it for a reason. Right? Raw milk, it's going to put you, there's lots of nasty things you can get from drinking raw milk, right? You know, I know people are like, well, when I was a kid, we used to. That was a long time ago, right? Now we have a lot more of these viruses that can go from one species to another, right? Even salmonella. You know, when you were little and you used to drink raw milk, your stomach was used to it, and your stomach was used to what was on your farm, right? That's not the case anymore. Right? Prevention, wearing gloves, and y'all, you know, I used to laugh and say I could sit on a dead cow and eat a bologna sandwich, right? And a long time ago I did, right? But now we're seeing a lot more of these things that we can catch, and I don't do that anymore. Like I said, I used to when I was younger, right? But all of the respiratory viruses, even just, all right, let's quit talking about high path for a minute. Just the regular flu, the pneumonia vaccine, right, the COVID vaccine, any of these respiratory viruses, all right. You know, I never got sick when I was younger. When I was 25, I could do a lot of things I can't now. But I've realized I'm not a spring chicken anymore, right? My immune system's not what it used to be. Right? And, you know, I mean, I didn't ever take off work when I was sick. Right? I never take sick days. I'll go in and be grumpy and make sure I spread the love around, right? But, you know, the thing is think about this. All right, if you get pneumonia tomorrow, who's going to take care of your farm? And on farms, we don't have sick days. The cows got to eat, and they don't care how you feel. Right? So if you get pneumonia tomorrow and end up in the hospital for a week, right, we can't afford that. And like I said, even if you're like, oh, I'm tough, I can take it. Like I said, just think, I know at my house, my uncle probably could come feed, but he doesn't know how many buckets go to which pen, right? So in order to take care of our animals, we got to take care of ourselves. Because like I said, this isn't a job where if you don't feel good, you just don't go in, right? So if we want to be able to take care of our animals, we've got to protect ourselves too. All right, soapbox, enough? All right. So do not drink raw milk, wear goggles, wear gloves, right? And take your flu vaccines. So the human flu vaccine is not 100% effective against the bird flu, but it's close enough, it's going to give you a little bit of protection. All right. Biosecurity, like I said, foot mats. All right, y'all, when I was in practice, the boots I wore to work never came on my farm. I knew what I'd been around all day, right? So if you're going to the stockyards, right, do not wear the shoes that you wear on your farm, right? You're better off wearing tennis shoes that you can throw in the washing machine when you go to the yards, right? Because everything is there and you don't want to bring it back home. All right, so I'm going to jump topics just a minute because we've got something else going on in the animal health world. All right, who's heard about screwworm? Right? You know, we've seen screwworm spray on the shelf for a long time. But the thing is nobody in here has ever actually seen screwworm. Right? We're farmers here, right? Maggots happen. Right? There are flies that we're not going to kill every fly. At some point, you're going to see maggots. But this is not your average maggot. This is a whole different beast. Right? We got rid of this in the U.S. back in the 60s. But the thing is it's coming back. What's the big deal? So most maggots, right, get on infected wounds, and the maggots eat like all the dead tissue. Like there's even some weird medical worlds where they use maggots to clean wounds because the maggots just eat the dead tissue on top. Not this guy. Right? So the difference between screwworms and all the other maggots that we've ever seen is this one eats live, healthy tissue. Right? So they can get on a scratch, simple as something like an ear tag. Right? And then they eat down into the healthy tissues. Right? So they take something that was just a little bit of a nick, and they're shaped like a screw. And they screw down into the healthy tissues and will take that tiny little scratch and turn it into a softball-sized hole, right? They eat down into the tissue and make these giant, nasty wounds. Like there on top, that was a deer. They got on its velvet antlers, right? And just literally ate an entire hole in its head, right? This is not something we want. Right? Good thing, right? I know, y'all hate when I start getting technical. Life cycle, there's the boy and the girl fly. That's a different talk if you haven't ever heard it, right? They mate. She lays eggs. The eggs hatch into maggots, the larvae, right? And then those will turn into another adult flies. The thing about this fly that's different than others that we take advantage of is that female only mates one time. She'll mate with the male one time in her life cycle, and then she just lays eggs. Right? So what we've done, and what we did to get rid of this, and we're about to do again, is we take a bunch of these boy flies and we expose them to radiation so they're sterile or not fertile, right? So then we release all these unfertile boys. And if that girl finds a boy that's infertile, she mates at one time, and then from then on, her eggs won't hatch because he wasn't fertile, right? So what they're having to do is take all these flies, right, expose them to radiation, and then go release them. It takes a little bit of time, right? The situation, like I said, we eradicated it. We pushed it all the way down to Panama, right? That was the line. And at Panama, they were just releasing those sterile flies. Well, here in the past year, it's broke the containment zone, and it's coming up through Mexico, right? As of 2 weeks ago, it was 70 miles from El Paso, right? So it's there, it's knocking on the door. The problem is when you look at Mexico, it's shaped like a funnel. When we were just having to release the flies in Panama, it's like this long, right? But as it's moved up, we have a whole lot wider area that we got to be releasing these boy flies to. And we only had one little factory making these boy flies. So we're on our heels trying to build facilities, right, to make more boy flies and a lot faster. Because like I said, it's a lot wider territory. All right, Kentucky, are they here? Yes. Mm-hmm. So actually they're making girl and boy flies, but they're exposing them all to radiation, so they're all infertile. So in theory, when they release these flies, half of them are girls too, but they're also infertile. Like I said, we're not supposed to be around radiation because it can cause cause infertility. We're doing that on purpose. Mm-hmm. And like I said, we only had, I don't know how wide Panama is, but as it's moved up, we've got a lot bigger ground we're having to cover. All right, Kentucky, can it be here? Sorta, right? 46 degrees kills it, right? It can't live in temperatures lower than 46 degrees. So right now, this winter, we don't have to worry about it, but if it keeps moving northward, in the summertime, we will. All right, what's the plan? They are building new facilities, but when you get the government involved, it takes 2 years to build just a building because of all the red tape, right? So they're going as fast as they can, but it'll probably be spring or next summer before they'll have any more factories making flies, right? So that's the other problem, right? They're doing it, right? But it's a slow process. All right, so what to look for? Like I said, in the wintertime, we don't have to worry, but next spring we will, right? So these things, like I said, they're shaped like a little screw. The female's got big red eyes and kind of like a blue metallic, but the chance of you sitting there seeing the actual fly is going to be pretty rare, right? What you're probably going to see are the maggots. Like I said, they are literally screw-shaped, and that's what they do, screw into the deeper tissues, right? They're larger than regular maggots, but also look for a wound that suddenly becomes a giant hole. Is it treatable? Yes. All right, Ivamec works. Cydectin doesn't, and Dectomax doesn't. Right, so that's a couple. Screwworm spray still works, right? So it is treatable. But if you suspect it, take samples, grab some of those larvae, and you just put them in rubbing alcohol. Don't have to do anything fancy, Tupperware container and some rubbing alcohol. And you can take it to either the state vet's office, right, or the Kentucky USDA office, and they will look at them and test them for free. All right. All right. And so, and with this too, and like I said, this is also zoonotic, right? Most of the time people don't get maggots on us, but it does happen. So far this spring in the U.S., we have had one person that had screwworms. And crazy, we're down there watching the southern border, and it was a human case up in Maryland, right? She had been on a cruise down in the Caribbean, and she came back with the maggots in her hair, right? So it does, right, infect humans, right? And the flies will go up the nose or in the ears, right? And those are places that are hard to control as well. So, you know, this is a human risk. And like I said, we're doing everything we can. Like I said, with avian flu, we couldn't control the birds. And the problem they're having down there on the southern border is when it's getting into the wildlife like deer, those are migrating. So it is moving northward. We're keeping track of it, but it may have another outbreak this spring. All right, that's all I got. Any questions? What was it? Well, so the girl on the cruise, you know, I guess she was laying on the beach or whatever, and they laid eggs in her hair, right? And, you know, those eggs can hatch in just a day or two. And they hatched into... The eggs themselves aren't itchy. When they hatch, they will be, though. So, you know, you would know, I think, if a fly went up your nose or something, a wound. But, you know, I mean, but also, you know, when we start talking about some of these Central American countries, they're not very well developed, right? And some of these people don't have the best of living conditions, right? So we do see it a little bit in some people traveling from some of these areas that aren't as advanced as we are. Most of the time you would know if a fly was on you. Most of the time you're going to swat a fly off. But if it flies up your nose while you're out feeding, I've been on the four-wheeler and swallowed a bug a time or two. I mean, it happens. All right. Right. Well, with this girl, like I said, her hair, you know, I don't know. To me, that just makes my head itch thinking about it. But it can happen. Right. You should know. But on livestock, like I said, this last case it doesn't need a big wound. It doesn't need literally these things got on an ear tag. Just, it takes 2 drops of blood to attract them. Right, so it doesn't have to be a nasty gaping wound. Yes, sir. Yeah, I mean, you know, fly eggs do here as well. They don't, it's the pupa stage in the ground, but of course our flies will come back every spring, and these kind of act the same way. So they're not going to, right, wintertime doesn't even kill our normal flies, but they just... Right. So we shouldn't see a problem with it till spring because 46 degrees, right? That's the point of them not hatching. All right? Mm-hmm. Yeah. So anything that you're shipping north. Yeah. We do. We do. Right, right. They were quarantining. And a lot of people like were getting really upset that they were depopulating or going in and killing all the birds. But the truth is it kills 90% of them anyway. So, yes, sir. Well, so yes. So the USDA, so the US, we are down there in Mexico building a facility with our money, but because we're playing offense instead of waiting for it to come to us. I've talked to some people and they said that communication between the two governments is not always the best, right? So they're not telling us everything, but we are down there building facilities in Mexico, trying to go in there and help them fight it. But communication's always the thing when you get government and politics involved. Right, right. Well, in Texas doesn't get under 46 degrees, except that one time they froze. But, you know, during the winter time, it can get in Texas, Mississippi, Alabama, you know, Louisiana, right? It doesn't get that cold there. Now, up here, right, we got a little bit of grace that we don't have to worry about in the winter time, but in the summer we very well may, right? Uh-huh. Yeah, I mean, you know, and they test milk from the cows. They're testing milk they pick up. So there are tests out there, but there's not any at-home test. Yeah. Right. You know, and there was a time where everybody drank, you know, but you were used to what was on your farm. But this, with the birds flying over, you can't control that. Right. Yes. Okay. Anything else? All right.